Hello and welcome to today's Econelastic video, in which we will be covering the supply curve and some of its properties. So just like in our demand curve video, the aim of this video is just to introduce the supply curve, explain some of those properties. You'll see a bit of a link between the demand curve and the supply curve. Obviously, you'll probably notice some of the scenarios work in a different way, as you might expect. So off the back of our video discussing the relationship between supply and price, we know that if the price of a good rises, then supply of that good will also increase. Therefore, logically, the supply curve must be upward sloping, i.e. it has a positive slope from left to right. So again, just as a reminder, economists do use the term curve even when the graph is a straight line. That's often how you'll draw these curves. It'll just be straight lines.
Yeah. So supply curves can be drawn for individual firms and for markets/industries as a whole. Just like with the demand curve, there can be different supply schedules for different goods. So if a firm has spare capacity, can easily access more raw materials, can readily switch production away from alternatives, and are able to hire more labour relatively quickly, then they are likely to have more elastic supply curve, which we'll look at on our screen now. So again, as with demand, price is plotted on the x-axis and the quantity is plotted on the y-axis.
And you'll notice, like Joe said, it's elastic, so it's shallower in this case. So let's use an example to illustrate this a little better. Take a company that produces wooden doors and wooden chairs. If the price of wooden chairs went much higher than they are now, then providing the firm has spare capacity, that they can simply order more wood on demand, that they can switch their production away from producing the doors and to producing the chairs relatively easily, which we're making the assumption that you can, because they're not too different a product. We don't know it very well. And then they can hire workers at short notice. So those 4 points that Joe made in his previous section, then they will be able to respond to the increase in price relatively quickly, and their supply schedule will look similar to that elastic supply curve that you saw on your screen previously.
Yeah. So now, alternatively, let's imagine a company that makes such a more complex good. So, for example, a tractor and a company like John Deere. So, as opposed to the chair and door manufacturer, whose only input were the material, raw material of wood and labour. So there are more inputs, far more inputs involved in producing a tractor, i.e. rubber tyres, steel, glass windows, engine parts, the list goes on. So even if the firm had if the firm had spare capacity, they would not be able to access all these inputs in a short space of time to fulfill it. They also produce construction and forest machinery, John Deere do. However, as the production process of these different products are so specific, they could they could likely not switch their volume of production from one to the other so easily.
I mean, we're making that assumption. We don't know the production process greatly, but logically, you'd think it's not quickly transferable.
So this would look like the inelastic supply curve on your screen. So as you can see from that graph, the curve is much steeper. So again, if the price goes up, only the quantity goes up slightly.
So this is why different goods will have different looking supply schedules. Like Joe said, there's some that have inelastic, some that have elastic, for the points we just covered. Put simply, if something is far more difficult to make, it will take longer for firms to respond to a change in price, and therefore their supply curve will look more inelastic. and also vice versa. If they can respond very quickly to that change in price, then their supply curve will look more elastic. However, just like the demand of goods is not just determined by the price, factors other than price also affect the supply of goods. So Joe is going to take us away with the first one of these factors, and we'll go into the next few.
Yeah. So if the costs of production are high, less profit will be made at any price. Reasons for a change in costs can be if inputs such as wages, raw material prices, rent, interest rates, and any other input price goes up. Technological advances can obviously reduce costs. For example, the robotics in warehouses that are being used at the moment, such as Amazon, that can replace human labour. Making the production process more efficient, this can involve organisational changes such as CEO, thinning of the managerial structure, right through to the order of production processes. Finally, taxes will raise production costs, whilst government subsidies can lower them. For example, farmers receive subsidies to keep the price of food low.
So another factor that affects the supply of goods other than price is the profitability of alternative products, or also known as substitutes in supply. So a good will become more profitable if its price increases and or the cost of producing it decreases. So again, we'll use an example. Remember in the company that felled trees and mined copper from our previous video? If the price then of timber goes up, or the cost of felling the trees goes down, or of course both, then logically the company will reduce its mining of copper. It'll shift away from that part of its business to produce more timber, and therefore the supply of copper will actually fall.
So another reason is if you produce one good and another good is also produced as a byproduct, these are known as goods in joint supply. For example, the process of refining crude oil to produce petrol. Fuels such as diesel and paraffin are produced as well. Therefore, if the demand for petrol increases and hence its price increases, then supply of the other two fuels will increase as well.
So another supply factor to consider are random shocks and other unpredictable events, sometimes referred to as black swans.
What's
so
the example in this one then?
Well, you can see what's coming up, can't you? This can include factors that affect livestock and food output, such as weather and disease. It can include wars that disrupt the supply of raw materials. It can include machines unexpectedly breaking. Also, there's those natural forces such as earthquakes, floods and fires, unpredictable events, as you might be gathering from these examples. And of course, the one that most of us would have never predicted, global pandemics, will also come under that category.
So we must also consider, just as we did with the demand graph, the expectations of future changes in price. For example, if the price of a good is expected to rise, manufacturers may temporarily reduce the amount that they sell. This allows them to build up stock of goods, which they can release to the market when the price does eventually rise. They could also invest in new machinery and or labour, so they are able to supply more when the price rise occurs.
So finally, a very simple factor is just the number of suppliers. So if a new firm enters the market, as you might imagine, the supply is likely to increase. So just to put this again into an example, if you're at a farmer's market, a local market, and the next time you go, it's gone from having 15 stalls to now having 16 stalls, the supply has gone up. It's pretty a simple concept in that sense. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. The graphs have been of use to you, and some of the factors other than price that affect supply have been useful and informative. Again, as always, if you don't understand anything, please leave a question in the comment section. We'll get around to answering them, and we hope to see you in the next video.
Thanks for watching.